Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 21st edition of Crop Talk. Seems like we just left July and now we're getting to the end of August. It seems August is going by fairly fast here. We were talking a little bit and seems like when July was ending, everybody was thinking it was going to be an early harvest and we'd be going in August here. And it just seems like things have slowed down here and we're on the verge of harvest, but we've been on the verge of harvest for a couple of days here, or almost a week, I guess. It just seems that things are holding on, and I guess it's a good thing because this way we'll get more crop filling to its full potential, and a lot of the regions did get some rain over the past week here, so that's definitely going to help get the crop filling out to its potential. I guess with the harvest being held off a little bit, I thought it'd be a good opportunity this week to talk about some of the costs that are involved in harvest and some of the questions that come up on a yearly basis, and some of the things that Manitoba Agriculture has for producers to use to figure out some of the costs. And Darren Bond is been doing a lot of this type of work for years now and has a few things that they've developed that make it a little bit easier for producers to figure out some of the costs that are involved in harvest. And so we're going to have Darren on. And then after that, I'm going to get Ann Kirk on, and she's going to talk about some of the lodging that has occurred lately in travels over the past week. I've definitely noticed a lot of crops that are lodging, and we'll just Anne is going to give us a brief talk on how we can maybe deal with some of those issues. So I guess with that, I'm going to hand it over to Darren, and then we're going to look at some of our harvesting costs.
Thanks, Lionel. I'll just start sharing my screen here. So I assume that you can see my screen now, Lionel?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So before I start, I'm going to just run through a few calculators that I think are timely for this time of year, but I do get questions like, how do I find them? So a lot of times just an internet search for Manitoba Agriculture straw cost calculator or equipment custom rental rate guides, things like that will lead you to it. But if you are in the website, there's a few spots here. If we look on the left-hand side, we have crops where a lot of the content on CropTalk are contained within here for fact sheets and the like. So a lot of good stuff in there. Our farm management's right here. We can click on that. And then we get into cost of production, farm machinery, farmland and buildings. So that's where it is. It's pretty easy to find once you realize, how that left-hand navigation starts. So we can see here all the different calculators that we have, and we're going to talk about straw costs, which is down there. So a lot of these calculators that we have, just so you know, they are in both Excel and also online. So it's pretty interesting that we can use that both ways. I like the online method because we can get it on our phones, we can get it on our tablets. Do have to have internet connection to do it, but it does make it pretty good. So I'm going to start walking through the straw cost calculator, a few things that we can use it for, and just see what it does and what it can show us. And it's a pretty neat little calculator. So this calculator is based on nutrient removal. So we can see at the top here we have our different fertilizer types from nitrogen 46, phos, potash, and sulfur. And all these can be changed. So we can change them to some a little bit more current values. These values that are preloaded in here are based off our spring fertilizer survey. So we will update this in fall when we do our fall fertilizer survey. But for these, we're just going to type in a little bit more, maybe more recent numbers that we're seeing. So if we change this, we can see that all these numbers down here will change. So we change our nutrient values, and we have a baling custom rate. We're going to leave it at $15 per bale, so that's the cost of baling. We have our average bale weight here. It's at 900 pounds. And then we have a producer markup, which is this, what I would like to call the unforeseen or the risk or anything like that. It's a number that you can use. You can set it to 0 if you want. We default it to 15. Just have a number in there that you can use if you so wish. One of the neat things, it does say round bales here, but really we can use any size of bales. If you want to do large squares, we can change it to say, 1,000-pound bales. And I think our custom rental rate guide says about $7 a bale for baling. We can even change it to small squares if you want, say 40, 50 pounds and 75 cents or $1 a bale for a custom baling rate. So that will all calculate down here into a per bale basis, because producers like to transact at per bale, but it's very important to know the weight that's in there, because really we're basing all this off weight, which is very important. So we can go down here and we can see we have a few different straw. We have cereal straw, pea straw, corn stover, canola straw, and soybean straw. So we have the different straws, and each of them have the different nutrient mix that are on average found within these bales. So depending on what you're using, it's pretty neat. We're just going to focus on cereal straw for now. So we can see here how to read this. Essentially, we have dollars per ton, that's short ton, and then dollars per bale. And we can see here, based on those numbers that I changed up above, that the straw value comes in at $11.56 per bale with that. If we were to add in a $15 baling cost and a little bit of producer margin, we're at about $30 or just over $30. That's based on a 900-pound bale with those values up above. So I've always encouraged people to get in there, play around with it, see what it comes up with, and kind of go from there. For some of the agronomic side of things, the potassium is probably the largest amount for the value within the nutrients that we can see here, just because there's so much potassium in a lot of the straw, and we can see the different types of straw have different amounts. Again, I get a lot of questions on this. Is it, how impactful is it to say something like the soil? And I don't know if Marla's on, but I listened to Marla quite a bit on this, and there's enough potassium in the straw, but if we get a rain, we can see some of that potassium wash out of the straw and go back into the soil. So we have to be aware of that. Obviously, potassium on sandy soil is more impact and when it might be in deficient situations compared to like a heavy clay or something like that. So I think knowing what type of soil this is on is important from the producer's perspective of selling the straw. So I think that's important to have an awareness about. But there's other components to this too. When I get the questions like, well, what should I charge for the straw? Something that is important, and especially now, and Lyle kind of led off with that we're kind of just in these early throes of harvest, and some of the things I've been hearing is how tough the straw is, and some producers are starting to drop the straw just as to gain some combine capacity, and especially in crops like oats or something like that, where the straw has a lot of moisture in it. A lot of producers are starting to drop it just to gain that combine capacity. So the straw almost is a bit of a nuisance factor, if you will. So factoring that into it too, when it comes down to pricing straw, I think is something to think about. And we'll talk about the equipment custom rental rate guide. I'll run a combine example just for example purposes. But we can see that the cost, and we all know the cost of equipment has gone up so much, that gaining that little bit of extra capacity by dropping straw does have some value in it too. So it's not just as simple as putting in these numbers and saying, oh, it's this, so it must be that. It depends on everyone's situation. So what this is meant to be a starting point in that discussion of trying to value straw. And then when we look at, okay, does our soil need some of these nutrients, or is this just a waste or a nuisance factor, and it'd be nicer to get the straw off because we have so much of it and it's tough and things like that. I think this starts that conversation. So I'm going to move on to another calculator. So we can actually go back to where we were here. We can go into our farm machinery, and we're going to look at the custom rental rate guide. So with the custom rental rate guide, this is essentially, I'm sure many of you have seen our printed guides at trade shows and at our service centers. This is the online version of the calculator. And with this, we can be a little bit more fine-tuned into our own situation and what's going on with our own equipment to be able to come up with a dollar value for how much it costs to do a certain activity. We're going to take combining, for example. So we can see here near the top, we can change a lot of these components. We can change the fuel, we can change the labor rate. Field efficiency, we have it set at 80% as the standard. So field efficiency is how much time the machine actually spends doing what it's supposed to do. So think of a combine. In the crop, there's going to be turning that is that 20% that's missing out of the efficiency: turning, roading, warming up, idling down, things like that. We have a rental and custom margin rate, again, just to have something in there. And then we also have how much of the machinery is financed and the interest rate and opportunity cost to come up with the cost of ownership numbers. And all of these, again, we can change to our own situation. So we're just going to take a simple example. We're going to take combine, and let's take a class 8. This includes the combine, but no headers. So we're going to throw a header on here too. And we can see here that we're going to take combine header, and let's go with a 40-foot flex draper. So we drop in these numbers here, and we can see that all these numbers down here auto-populate. These are our default numbers. These are what's in the guide. All these numbers can be changed to your own situation. Probably the biggest question, or the most asked question I get with this, is like, well, this is new or pretty much new equipment. I have a 10-year-old or 15-year-old piece of equipment. How do I change this? And depending on the situation, we can change these numbers. And then obviously changing this number will change a lot of the numbers down below. My caveat or caution is that if we're using older equipment, we should look at increasing our repairs and maintenance rate, because obviously older equipment is going to cost a little bit more to keep going, and especially with the price of parts and labor and getting equipment into the shop and getting it field ready, those bills have grown quite a bit in the last couple of years. We need to account for that, and we probably also want to decrease our work rate or our field efficiency to represent a little bit more downtime and breakdowns and stuff like that. So we can definitely change these numbers to everyone's situation, but again, we have to make sure that we balance everything out, because we can also lie to ourselves if we use unrealistic numbers, right? So using this, we can see we put in these numbers, and if we go down to the bottom here, we can see our ownership costs, repair, maintenance, and rental costs for each implement spelled out separately, and we can have up to 3. And then we can see our fuel, labor, and rates. And then at the bottom here, we can see the combined rates of the two, because again, when we talk about, say, combines and headers, for example, we'll just combine the two and have a one cost for that. So in this case, we're looking at an hourly rate of about 400 for a rental hourly rate of right around $450 an hour, about $30 an acre, based on those work rates, or custom rates of nearly $600 an acre when we count in the fuel and labor and that little bit extra margin, or nearly $40 an acre for a custom rate. So we can see these numbers actually get pretty big, but the costs of this equipment is quite large too. So that's they're all tied together. So I have one more that I'm going to show you, and then I'll throw it back to Lionel, and we can have some questions. The next one we are going to go to is into our farmland and buildings, and we are going to look at our grain bin and farm building cost calculator. Again, we're going to look at the online version here. And I get a lot of questions about this again. So we have the grain bin cost calculator at the top. And if I scroll a bit, we have a building. So building cost calculator. So, think of equipment storage, if you will, as well. So we can, again, change all these numbers here to whatever suits our fancy. We can change, these numbers to maybe more accurately reflect what's going on. The cost of, just like everything, the cost of bins have gone up tremendously as well. And we can see based on these depreciation numbers and these numbers here, and we can also put in our different rates. We have a repair rate, an investment rate, and insurance cost, and taxes and the like. We then boil it down into a cost per bushel per year, or cost per bushel per month. So, and again, it's just based on cost amounts where these values come from. So it is always harder to, again, when we start to value, say, older bins, what they are worth and stuff like that. But at least this, again, gives us the beginning conversation starter, if you will, to come up with some of this stuff. Another question I have, and it's not on here, but I'll just kind of go over it. I get a lot of questions. How much does it cost to run a fan? So, and I'm speaking in very rules of thumb, very rough number. Essentially, every 1 horsepower fan consumes about 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So if we take a 10 horse fan at current electrical rates, it's about $1 an hour to run, or about $24 for a day. A 7 horse fan is roughly 70 cents an hour to run, or about $17 per day. 3 horse fan, about 30 cents an hour, or about $7 a day. And a 1 horse fan is about 10 cents an hour, or about $2.50 per day to run. So I know there's a lot of bin rentals with fans on there, and the fans are on the bin owner's meter. So there's no way to split that out from, say, the landowner's yard site or house, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of producers who are renting bins will just keep a log of when they turn the fan on, when they turn it off, and then be able to count up the hours or days that the fans have been on, and then reimburse the owner for the electrical use on a cost basis. So those are just some very rough rules of thumb that we can use, and it gets us pretty close for estimating electricity costs. So lastly, before I hand it back over to Lionel, we have our building cost calculator. So this, we can put in our building size, our building costs, and again, same as above, the depreciation, investment rates, and repair rates, and everything of the like. And then we can come out to a cost of the rental per year, or a cost on per square foot. So per square foot, if you're not renting the whole shed, you're just parking an equipment in there, you can figure out the footprint of that combine and a square footage, and then charge out based on that. And I get questions from both owners of sheds and producers on both sides with this one. What is a fair amount? Because what I find, everyone's wanting to pay a fair amount. It's not that they're wanting to overcharge. It's more like they're just wanting to not underpay or undercharge. They want to be fair with who they're transacting with. So this is a good calculator to use. It's independent, third party. The people can use it, put in the numbers they agree to, and then it calculates out these numbers. So it actually works out to be pretty good from that perspective. So that's a quick overview on some of the things that are popping up this time of year for some of our calculators that as we starting to get into the harvest rush, and especially if we're looking at renting some bins, or maybe getting the neighbor in to do some combining or selling some straw, it's nice to have some of these numbers hashed out before we start doing it. I think it's always better to do that rather than, okay, we've done it, now there's a dispute over cost once the grain's in the bin or the bales are already off the field for straw. So don't be afraid to use them. They're pretty easy. And again, these online ones work on the phone too. So it makes it really quick and easy to sit at the kitchen table and hash out some numbers and have something where everyone agrees with. So Lionel?
Hey, Darren, just leave your screen up there for now, but
You betcha.
um, for baling costs, Casey, you're working on baling of straw. Uh, is there a difference between baling straw and baling hay for the custom rate?
For the custom costs, no. The for the actual baling, I think the round baling we're using $15 for that example. No, the cost for baling hay or straw is much the same. If you're using net wrap, there's a little bit of a surcharge for net wrap, but the actual cost of baling's the same.
Okay, and that is the bale done. So does that mean
Yeah.
that's not just for the baler, that's the bales done, right?
Yes. So, and then if we want to figure this out, we can again jump into this. We can pick a tractor, and if we're going to pick front wheel assist, and let's just say it's a small front wheel assist, and then we can go harvesting hay. We can find our baler large round in this example, and we're going to do say this amount, and then for the 5x6 bales, and then we can see. I'm going to just scroll down. So sorry for the scrolling, everybody. So we can see, and it says acre, but it's per bale for these ones. We can see the custom rate is for this one 1605. It says per acre, but it's per bale.
Okay, so that 1605 would include the net wrap then, right?
Net wrap, if we're using a bigger baler, yes. Yeah. So, because I think, yeah, it's included in our bigger balers.
Okay, and the other question that I got was on the aeration fans, but I think you covered that pretty good with your talk there.
Yeah, and I can go over that again just in case people didn't copy that down. So I'll just run through it again quickly.
If you could, yeah.
So yeah, so about 1 horsepower fan consumes about 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So a 10 horse fan is about $24 per day, or about $1 an hour. 7 horse fan is about $17 per day, or about 70 cents per hour. A 3 horse fan is about $7 a day, or about 30 cents an hour. And a 1 horse fan is about $2.50 per day. So do $2.50 per day, or about 10 cents per hour. And again, those are really rough rules of thumb. And that's using the current electrical rates. So we're blessed with cheap electricity. So that's the good thing about that. And even though, just like everything goes up, the electrical rates they've gone up, but it's been reasonable when we look at it compared to some of this equipment and buildings.
Okay, and the other question is, do you have a grain drying calculator?
We do have a grain drying calculator. So I apologize for having so many tabs open, but the Zoom toolbar is kind of blocking me from accessing some of them. So the drying one, let me find it here. I got to remember where it is.
Yeah, well, it's good you're going through this because it's always hard sometimes to find them. So
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to use the grain drying cost calculators under crops cost of production. I'm going to just use the online version again. And we have here, oops, sorry. We have here the different things that we can use. So we can use batch or continuous flow. We have different crops that we can use. And then we have the 2 different fuels that we can use. So just depending on the situation, you can pick for whatever you want again, and then go into the different amounts for, say, the initial moistures and then the ending moistures and the different drying capacities. And again, all these numbers, you can change if you so wish, and then just scroll on down to make sure that this is accurately reflecting. And I'm not going to change too much here, but then we can go into the crop drying cost report, which is at the top, and we can come out to costs per ton per bushel for everything. So the total costs here is at the bottom line here. So in this example, it's 11 cents per bushel, or $4 a ton. If you over dry, it will actually kick out some numbers for the cost of over drying. So that would be if you lower that final drying amount to a lower amount. So we'll show that too, but it breaks down all the different costs for the different line items for both operating and fixed, and comes up with the total cost down there. And I'm surprised how many farmers use this, and even a lot of custom dryer or farms that do custom drying, they'll use this quite a bit. So it's a good little tool to use.
Yeah, and actually, I just got a message from Lori saying that she gets a lot of those calls on the toll-free number, and so a lot of people are looking for something like that. And you know, it's something I think that producers actually needed, because I think it would just helps break stuff down, you know, and kind of everything's broken down there and makes sense then, right?
Yeah, and we're seeing, I would even say we're seeing more dryer usage, that the cost of these combines are so much, just like we've seen in the previous example, that you know what, to start a day or two earlier and knowing that you're going to zing it through the dryer, but putting it through the dryer in at this time of year is a lot different than putting it through in October or November, right? And you know, makes these makes it spend less time in the dryer, right? And you know, that's like, we can change that with the outside air temperature here, that we can, you know, if we put it up to, you know, 20 degrees Celsius, it's going to drop our costs. It dropped it, you know, from a, or sorry, dropped it from 11 cents down to 9 cents. You know, little things like that, you can see the impact of it. So we are seeing more and more people dry their crops just as an effort to get more capacity out of these combines to justify that combine investment, because they're so large now.
Okay, there was a comment made that the cost per bushel doesn't have a fixed cost.
Cost per bushel on this page, is it? Or
Yeah, I think
so
on this, yeah.
yeah, so the cost per bushel is so we have this estimated market price. So this comes into play when we're figuring out the cost of over drying and stuff like that. So it's in there for, I think, the originally they wanted to show that there is a cost to over drying, that if we were to change these final moisture numbers, it will kick in certain situations. So
Okay. Okay. And then one other question was, have you figured out what the extra cost of chopping straw is compared to dropping?
no, we don't have that, but it can be done in the sense of, and I would probably look at, sorry, I'm trying to find my equipment calculator here. If we go back to, I'm just going to refresh this, so just give me a minute here. If we go back to finding that combine, and then we can change the work rates. And if I think we're at 15 acres per hour is the work rate for the combine. So let's just see what happens. So let's say 15 acres per hour is the work rate for the combine. So sorry for the scrolling here, but we're looking at a custom rate of just under $600 and just under $40 if we were to say drop this by, I don't know if I can, maybe my computer's starting to seize up on me here a little bit. Yeah, for some reason I'm not able to. I'll drop our
Okay. So you would,
efficiency. There we
yeah.
go. We'll drop our efficiency. And then so now we can see this rate here. The hourly rate won't change, right? Because the combine's just plugging along by hour, but you get less acres done. So if we look at it per acre, the costs have gone up. So we're what, about $3 an acre-ish more from a combining cost. So, you know, if we lose 2 acres an hour because we have to chop our straw versus just dropping it, it's $3 an acre right there that we've essentially saved by dropping versus chopping. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I know
so
last year a lot of producers were having problems with straight cutting canola towards the end there, and I seen a lot of straw being dropped, and it definitely made a difference on time in the field. That's for sure.
Yeah, and maybe 2 acres an hour isn't enough. It depends on the situation, but just a small drop like that, it has quite a large impact on the costs. So again, if it's costing us a couple acres an hour, it's $3 an acre in this example. It's I would argue then that you wouldn't need to charge as much for the straw. I mean, you could charge as much for the straw. People charge what they want, but if you're looking at this from a cost perspective, if you're saving $3 an acre by dropping the straw, then again, you don't need quite as much for it because it's helping you out on the combine cost end of things.
Yeah, and probably the other thing you need to factor in is usually when you're making that decision, it's later in the fall. So time in the field, you may have to quit, an hour earlier or so because you can't put it through as compared to the other way. So you may be gaining something there as well.
Yeah, there's lots of different nuances to it. It might be even grade quality, right? If you're able to, get an extra quarter done before the rain versus not, if it's something like say wheat and you lose a grade out in the field, or if it's standing canola and you have a little bit more pod drop before you get back out to it, or things like that, there could be a crop loss component to this as well. And even if there isn't just the risk of that, again, having the grain in the bin is worth so much more than having it out in the field, right? The security of it, knowing what you have, all this type of stuff. So there's definitely a lot of cases to be made that the straw cost in terms of that nutrient value is one thing, but the time saved, the lower risk, the getting the crop done sooner, that has a lot of value too, just like you said, Lionel.
Right. And I guess on the negative side, I guess with the dropping in cattle numbers across the province, we might not be needing as much straw anymore either, unless we're going to start selling it out of province.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thanks, Darren. That covered a lot of stuff. And I think the big thing is getting people aware that all this stuff is available and at their fingertips if they need it. So thanks for doing that today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, so instead of me grabbing the screen back, I'm going to shift it right over to Anne, and Anne's going to talk about some of the lodge crop that we've been seeing lately and maybe some of the management things we can do to work our way through it. So Anne, if you want to grab the screen, we're ready for you.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen now?
You bet.
Okay, so yes, Lionel asked me to talk about lodge cereals today. So we've definitely seen a lot of lodging, or at least I've seen a lot of lodging in various parts of the province in the last couple of weeks. So maybe a few weeks ago, I noticed quite a bit of lodging, mostly on headlands. And then after last week's rain and some wind, I've noticed a lot more kind of general lodging. So lodging basically throughout entire fields. So just talking about some of the risk factors and how to manage those fields. Sorry, just trying to advance the slide here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so lodging, just to cover some basics, is generally the result of wind and wet weather. So how much lodging we see really depends on a lot of factors, like the variety and how susceptible it is to lodging, like what the variety stem strength is, how healthy that crop is. So does it have a lot of like root or stem diseases or insect damage? So there's a lot of factors that go into how severe lodging will be. But we do typically see the greatest lodging losses, or the greatest yield losses when lodging occurs in that couple of weeks after head emergence. And that's just because if we're really cutting off the carbohydrates that are moving up to the head, or how much photosynthetic energy is taking place, then we'd really be reducing yield. So plants may recover from early season lodging, and we typically see that with some like goosenecking in the field, where the stem will lay flat on the ground and then come up to and then go straight up again. But with later season lodging, we don't typically see recovery. And the pictures I have here are looking at the two different types of lodging. So the top picture is stem like breakage, and the bottom picture is root lodging. So with the stem breakage, we typically see the stem kind of breaking or failing, and then that crop laying flat on the ground after that broken point. And then with And then with the root lodging, typically the whole plant is tipped over. One thing to consider for this year as well is that when we are seeing some of this later season lodging or lodging throughout the growing season, is that in many cases, we've had very wet soils and fairly saturated soils throughout the growing season. So some of those root systems just couldn't develop the way they typically would, and just having less anchorage strength in the soil because we might have smaller and shallower root systems because of this wet weather. So root lodging, just to follow up with that, does tend to occur earlier in the growing season. And with stem lodging and breakage, this is when the lower internodes bend or break. Typically, this is the result of storms, so hail, wind, and rain events. And this also tends to occur when the crop is drying down or ripe. And this is really, when we think about how a plant grows, the weight has really shifted to the top of the plant. So if we have those, a spike that's full of heavy seeds, that's a lot of weight that's being put on that stem. And then some of those wind and rain events can cause that stem to break just with that extra weight on the stem of the plant. So some things to consider for lodging management. This is kind of just for next year, like something to consider for the spring. But genetics is important. So looking at the height of the plant, the stem strength, and then how the root and crown develops. This is different for every plant, and it's not well known, but is something that could be important. And this is something that's important to look in the seed guide. So when you're choosing varieties, we do have lodging ratings for every variety. And then agronomics. So some of the things that we could see an impact from this year is the nitrogen rate. So this does have a high impact. When we have high nitrogen rates, we do see a lot of plant growth and might see longer stems that are a bit weaker. Seeding rate does have a moderate impact as well. So when we have a very dense plant stand, can also be more crop competition for that sunlight. So we could see longer internode length. And then also we can see sometimes some differences in root system development with the seeding rate. And I'll show that on the next page. But I just wanted to mention here with the nitrogen rate and seeding rate, this is one of the main reasons why we do tend to see a lot of lodging on headlands. So in areas where we're turning a lot and there's a lot of overseeding, we might be having double the seeding rate in some cases and double the nitrogen rate. And that's why you'll often see kind of like a strip of lodging around the field where the seeder has been turning a lot, just because the nitrogen rate is really high and there's a lot of seeds in the ground. And that's the area of the crop that will lodge first. I just wanted to show this picture because I think it is relevant for both seeding rates and also something to consider for the wet weather we've been having. So in Amy's PhD research, she did look at lodging management and did actually find that seeding rate had a huge impact on lodging in the plants. And one of the main reasons for this is root development. So at the bottom of this picture, you can see with low plant densities where the plant has a lot of space and a lot of tillers, you end up with like a very nice, well-developed root system. One of the reasons for this is because, so in the low plant density, the plant will compensate because it has a lot of resources for that lower density by increasing tillering. And every tiller does have its own crown root system. So you end up with this very well-developed, well-spread out root system. In a very high seeding rate, so at the top of the picture, where you might only be having one stem per plant, or maybe one stem and one tiller, that root system is just less well developed because we don't have all of those tillers root system contributing. And then we'll see something very similar in this wet weather. So just if we have a very undeveloped root system, or perhaps some root rots or different issues with the plants just because of saturated soils throughout the growing season, we could end up with a very poorly developed root system and make those plants much more susceptible to lodging. So losses due to lodging are very variable. It really depends on the severity of lodging, so how much lodging we actually see in the field. But lodging does reduce yield by interfering with photosynthesis. So that means when the plants are shaded, so say a bunch of plants are on top of each other, there's really less leaf area photosynthesizing, and that can reduce yield. And also carbohydrate movement. So when that stem is crimped, carbohydrates are having a very difficult time moving up the plant to the spike. An estimate that's commonly used is a yield loss of 1 bushel per acre per day until crop maturity. So this really depends on the cultivar, what growth stage the plant is at, how severe this lodging is, and then additional wind and rainfall events as well. But really how this works is, so you would get this yield loss because of reduced photosynthesis and reduced carbohydrate movement. And when we think about what kind of losses we'd see, it's important to consider when the lodging event occurred. So if we have early lodging, so closer to when the spike has, like closer to flowering, you would likely reduce kernel number in the plant. So if there's less resources getting up to the spike, just not as many kernels will develop. But if we have later lodging in the growing season, say at the soft dough stage, when that kernel is really putting on weight, that could reduce kernel weight. So reducing the amount of photosynthesis that can get up to the spike at that point would make for lighter seeds. And I've definitely seen this in fields kind of assessing maturity in different lodged areas is if you kind of thresh out those seeds in a very lodged area, they in some cases will be like hard and ready to combine, but shriveled because they just weren't able to access the resources that they needed to finish their growing. So then some of the other losses due to lodging is reduced harvest speed and efficiency. So this kind of relates to what Darren was talking about, where you're going to be really slowing down the combine. In some cases, having to swath some of those lodged areas. You're also putting a lot more material through the combine. So if you have to have the header a lot lower, we're putting in a lot more stem material and likely driving slower. Sometimes those areas might not dry down the same way, so you might be driving slower for that reason as well. Increased yield loss because you definitely will end up with some of those heads left on the ground. And then, as I mentioned, slower travel speeds. So I think anyone that's combined a really large field knows that you need to have a lot of patience because your speed will be a lot slower and, perhaps more difficult to put through the combine. So harvesting flattened crops, there's not really a lot, just some tips here. The number one thing is to drive slow and be really patient because it is going to take longer to combine and you need to be just patient to get it through the combine. The reel position is also important. So when we're thinking about how those crops lodge, in some cases, we will see all of the crop laying flat on the ground in one direction. In many cases, though, like in this, well, this is difficult to see, but in this wheat field here on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that the heads are kind of all over the place. When they're all over the place, it's difficult. You don't want to be like cutting the head with the knife bar. So trying to have the reel out in front of the knife bar to like lift the heads over top of that cutter bar and into the combine can be helpful. Using lifters. So an example of lifters is on the picture here to like help lift that plant off the ground, and combine lodged wheat on a right angle if possible. And then as a very last resort, which no one wants to do because it's extremely slow and frustrating, is to combine in one direction. So if all of your wheat is lying, or your oats or whatnot are lying flat on the ground, you would want to be combining in one direction. So like the head or the spike in the combine first, which would be slow and frustrating, but in some cases that's probably the only option in a really extreme lodging event. So that's all I have, Lionel, for lodging.
Okay, if you want to just hang on before we take the screen, but I was at one producer's place, and one of the things he was asking me was that has been adding extra phosphate to his when he plants his cereals to try to build it up so when he plants his soybeans. And he was wondering if this could be maybe because of the extra phosphate.
That's a good question. I am not sure. I haven't heard that before, but I will look into that and let you know if I can find something. But I like potassium is important for stem strength. I haven't heard anything about too much phosphorus reducing stem strength, but I'll look into that and let you know.
Okay, good. Yeah, no,
I'll put that in the Q&A if I can find something before the end of Crop Talk.
perfect. Yeah, no, I was just it was curious when we were talking, he mentioned that, and I just kind of got the same same as you. It was kind of looking, well, geez, that could be. I never even thought of actually, because he's almost doubling his phosphate so he can build it up for his soybean year. And so I just thought was wondering if that might be part of the issue, but
Well, I
the
think,
other,
I guess one thing to consider would be fertilizer placement and just if that could be restricting root growth. So if you
okay,
end up with like some sort of fertilizer toxicity, no matter what the nutrient, you might expect more lodging if you have poorly developed root systems because of that fertilizer, right in the seed row. So I think that would be one consideration.
okay,
But if it's
yeah,
just high
and
levels of phosphorus in the soil that's not impacting the root growth, I don't
mhm.
really think that would be a big issue.
Okay, no, that kind of makes sense too. And yeah, we also got talking about the application of pig manure, and if that would be, we should be seeing it in that as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like high nitrogen rates are probably the biggest factor contributing to lodging. So if you do have very high rates of nutrients in the soil, then you will likely, that's when your risk factors would be biggest for lodging.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anne. That was good information, and hopefully we don't have to deal with too much more. But I know in my travels, I've definitely been seeing more of it this year than I have in the past couple of years. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely after that rain last Thursday, some fields that were looking pretty good that I drive past on a daily basis were completely flat on the ground after that rainfall. So it's pretty disappointing to see.
Yeah, and actually, just one more thing, your comment regarding the roots not having to go down for moisture, and maybe the root or anchorage of the plant is probably not as strong as it's been in previous years too. So that's a pretty good point there, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably a big factor this year.
Good. Okay. Crop scouting panel, and the first question is going to go to John. Been doing some fields, grasshopper surveys, and been grabbing some pictures. So I figured I'd put a few of the ones that I've been taking pictures up, and maybe he can identify them. I'm not sure if the bottom left one is a grasshopper or not, but I thought the perfect guy to ask is John. And then also, cricket numbers are high again this year, and I was just wondering if he can maybe give us a little bit of information on that as to why. And then the caterpillar I found in the canola field. So, John, if you could take it away from there.
Okay, well, I'll start with your grasshoppers. So the top one, I guess top left, is a two-striped grasshopper. So that's one of our common potential pest species. Probably the most common grasshopper we're seeing this year is two-striped grasshopper. They've got a very broad palate, so they will eat most crops really, but they do have their preferences. Often they will start out in some of the crops that are nice and lush early in the season, and then they're often moving into crops such as canola, sunflowers, some of the other crops later when some of their earlier crops are maturing. However, there are instances where they could be hatching out or more widespread in a crop like canola, but often they are moving in from other crops to some of those later crops. And one thing to look for is edge effects if you're scouting for them in a crop like canola. The one on the bottom left is actually a katydid. There's a few different types of katydids. This one's called the slender meadow katydid. It by far our most common katydid here in Manitoba. They are not a pest species. Hard to see in this photo, but they have very long antennae, which are actually longer than their body even. So the grasshoppers that are green with really long antennae, those are katydids, not crop pests. You will often see a lot of them on the ditches. As you move into the field, you will see less and less. It would be a very rare thing to see a lot of them right in a crop. So we don't consider them a pest species. And the one in the middle is also a non-pest species. I would have to key that one out actually. Nymph ID can be, the grasshopper nymph ID can be really, really tricky because some species change their color as they go through the stages. So that's one of the non-pest species, but that is one I would need to key out. The cricket at the top, that's a fall field cricket. In Manitoba, we've actually got 17 different types of crickets. There are 2 species we call field crickets. The ones you hear chirping in June are the spring field cricket, and the ones you hear chirping right now are mainly fall field crickets. The fall field cricket is by far our most abundant cricket in most years. They're omnivores, so they feed on plant material. They will feed on even dead plant material on the ground. They are opportunistic predators. They don't really hunt like a lot of insects, but they will feed on things such as grasshopper eggs, which they will even dig for. So again, they're not really hunters, but if they come across grasshopper eggs, they will certainly devour them. They get good protein from them. They often don't climb plants, but we have seen exceptions to that. There have been years where we've seen them climbing up on canola and even feeding on the pods. Not common for it to be at a level where we consider them a pest and consider spraying them. Can happen, but not common. And usually when we've seen that, it's been in dry years where moisture seems to be limited. And my speculation is they're climbing up the plants because they're looking for moisture, and the seeds at that time probably had good moisture. The caterpillar is a type of tiger moth caterpillar that we call salt marsh caterpillar. So tiger moths, the caterpillars are usually very hairy. Salt marsh caterpillar, it has a very, very broad group of plants that it will feed on. It's really not considered a crop pest of any field crops. You will see the odd one in a canola field, and there's a lot of other crops that you may occasionally see one in, but it would be very rare to see large numbers of these in any of our field crops here. If anyone does come up, upon that, please let me know. But usually with salt marsh caterpillar, it's more of a one-off thing where somebody saw this. They're very large caterpillars. They're very noticeable. But usually because they stand out so much, it's a one-off where people see a couple of them in a field, but usually not much more than that. They actually become a really neat-looking moth. The moth has white forewings and yellow hind wings, and it looks like someone took a pepper shaker because they've got black dots all over both sets of wings. So that's salt marsh caterpillar. Again, not a pest species.
Good. Yeah, no, definitely the colors definitely stands out. So you definitely notice them when you see them. Good. Thanks, John. Okay. Gonna go through a bit of a crop update, but before I do that, there was a question. Lori, do you or a comment that was in the thing? I seem to have lost my question panel.
Yep, I've got it. So it says, I have a quick question unrelated to not today's topic necessarily. I need to ask if anyone knows where I can take a sample of white cockle to test for, I'm going to say it wrong, saponins, and what lab would potentially test for that.
Okay, and that was I guess that was for who was it from again?
Well, it's just for white cockle, taking a sample of white cockle and test for saponins, and I can actually send this off to maybe Kim or Pratacera after today's broadcast.
Sure, and if you could also maybe we'll send it out when we send out the copy of the webinar today?
Okay, sounds great.
Great. And I guess the only question I had is a matter what stage it's in, because I guess right now it'd probably be in the seed stage probably. So looking at some of the crops and the province here right now, one of the crops that definitely benefited from the recent rains is soybeans. Through the whole province. I guess most of them are in that R4 to R5 stage, with some of the eastern and centrals being in the R5 to R6 stage. And I know the beans I've been in, there's lots of podding going on right now. The pods are filling, lots of nice pods forming right to the tops of the plant, as you can see in the bottom middle picture there. There's the odd one that's maybe losing its pod, but a lot of those pods are starting to fill now too. So right now, some good potential, but we just need the good weather to stay with us now, and hopefully no storms coming through. Wheat harvest, winter wheat and fall rye harvest is winding down, I think, throughout the whole province here. I think by next crop report, we're going to be seeing a lot of the fall rye and winter wheat completed. Yields vary a little bit, but we're probably looking at an average of about 75 bushels an acre for a lot of the province. Some of the earlier fields, maybe we didn't of winter wheat, I know didn't yield as high, but I've been hearing some really good reports of yields from fall rye. Spring cereal harvest basically just started. I know Darren made the comment about getting going early and getting the crop off early and running it through a dryer. And I was down south this weekend, there was a couple producers combining. Wheat was testing anywhere between 20 and 23, but they were doing exactly that. They were taking advantage of the longer days and the easier drying weather, and running it through the dryer and getting it off. Quality is good, and getting a jump on harvest here. When you look at the other crops, barley may be a little bit higher than wheat, about 15% completed for the province. A lot of pre-harvest being done right now. A lot of the crop is ready to go for that. So I think right now it's just a matter of producers finding the time and getting to the fields and getting it done. I know one guy I did talk to that was applied fungicide by air this year. Wanted to do the calculation of how much he would damage by going through with field crop sprayer, and whether it was worthwhile to do the aerial application, or was it worthwhile going in the field with the sprayer. So definitely some interest in some of those calculations to figure out what you might lose by tracking through the field. It'll be really interesting to see when we get to canola and some of that way it's lodged right now, whether producers are going to do that, because it's even hard to see the fungicide applications with their infield sprayers right now. Canola harvest started in the central part of the province, but I would say a lot of guys are probably a week to 2 weeks away from spraying. I think a lot of the canola is in the pod fill stage. So looking okay. It's improved a lot. The recent rain is definitely going to help it fill the rest of those pods up. So I think we got a bit of time yet before we'll see a lot of canola coming off. Sunflowers, they're changing quickly. We're right from anywhere from flowering to starting to lose some of the ray flowers, and varying in the field. I think what happened maybe this year is we had a little bit of uneven germination in some places. So, but good thing about sunflowers, they can stand for a while and catch up. So good there. Where are we sitting? I guess as a province by region for harvest wise, you can see we're basically around 5% or under throughout the whole province right now, sitting at an average of 3. Central are definitely ahead of the game, but they've been ahead of the game kind of all season long. And but I think everybody's looking for some drier weather now, so they could just keep going. Crop still remains in good condition. I think we talked about a few things that might be affecting some of the quality, and I think we might see that as we get later into harvest. But right now, I think everybody's reporting, good to fair conditions basically, and again, just waiting for some of that crop to come off. The hay listing, that's one thing I've been commenting the last couple of times. There's definitely a lot of bales out there this year. So if you got bales for sale, call our 1-800 number and we can get you on the hay listing service. Crop residue burning has started. It's hasn't been great weather this last few days for burning, but I don't think there's a lot to burn out there yet anyway. So I think, but just to let you know that you need to be keeping an eye on that as it started at the beginning of August. Our MASC service centers, their phone numbers and locations. So if you got any questions regarding your coverage as you get into harvest, I think we needed to have our carryovers reported by last week. So if you haven't, definitely need to be getting in contact with them as soon as you can. And my contact information and Lori's contact information. So if you're wanting topics discussed, or if you have any ideas or questions, definitely give us a call. And thanks for the presenters today. And we'll be talking to you next week, August the 28th. And by that time, we'll probably be seeing a lot more combines in the field. So have a good week and see you next week.